When working on large applications, there is a chance for different developers use the same keys for providing different kinds of data, and this may potentially lead to all kinds of bugs. So in this lesson we're going to improve the way we are providing data to descending components. And instead of using string keys, like we are doing in here, we're going to use symbols. So we will create a separate file where we will define all our symbols. And then in the parent component, when we use function provide to provide access to some data, we're going to export particular symbol and use it as a key, as well as where we're injecting the data by using function inject. Here we're also going to export and use that injection key. So let's get going, and the first thing we're gonna do is create new file called keys.js inside the source folder. And in here we're basically going to export all those keys we use for function provide. The first key will be called update timeline item activity seconds, and the value of course will be symbol. And since symbols are unique, this way we're going to avoid any potential collisions with injection keys. And now let's go ahead and import this symbol inside of app component. Let's write an import statement. We're gonna group all injection keys inside of keys object like this. And for the first call of the function provide, let's just reference keys object and use appropriate key that we have just defined inside of keys.js. So now in order to use this key in the component where we're going to inject the data, we also have to write an import statement and import that particular key, update timeline item activity seconds, from the keys module. And in here where we use function inject, we need to reference that key instead of this string. But as we can see right now, the problem is that our constant name equals to the key name, which is not going to work, so we have to come up with a unique name of the key. For example, we can append suffix key, and the same thing let's do while importing this key. And of course, where we have defined this constant, we also need to use this suffix key. And one more place where we have to fix the key is inside of app component. Let's append this suffix in here. And now let's make sure that we still can choose the time for a particular activity, and then can start tracking this time. And this time will be decreasing on activities page. That's exactly what we're seeing. So this part is working, we can continue. And what I'm basically going to do now is copy all these provide function calls, paste those inside the keys.js, and define constants for every key. I'm basically going to copy and paste individual key names and use those as constant names, like so. And then I'm also going to append suffix key to every constant name. And now let's go back to the root component and pretty much do the same thing in here by appending suffix to these keys and referencing those keys by using object keys. And now what's left to do is actually go into every component where we use function inject to get access to provided data and replace all string keys with symbol keys. Let's start with activity item component. As we can see in here, we're using function inject 3 times. So let's append suffix key to all these keys and then copy these keys and use it for an import statement up here. We're importing all those keys from our new key.js module. Let's just apply basic formatting and switch over to the next component, activity seconds to complete. In this component, we use function inject only once, so let's append suffix key to this key, scroll up, and add an import statement for timeline items key, like so. Next one we have the activity form component. In here we're using function inject also once, so let's fix this key and write an appropriate import statement for this key right here. Inside the timeline item component, we use function inject twice, so we have to fix keys in both places, and then copy these names and write an import statement as always from our new module keys. And after this, it is really important to check if our application is working fine. We're gonna basically click around our application and make sure that this way we don't get any errors. As we can see, everything is working good. And now there is also one more thing that I'd like to mention in this lesson. It is related to modifying provided values in descendant components. So for example, in this component, we are injecting timeline items. And let's see what happens if I'm going to try to append new item to this array by using method push. As we can see in the browser, we got a bunch of validation warnings, but in fact, Vue allowed us to modify the data that we have provided from root component. And actually allowing such data mutations inside the descendant components may lead to some bugs. So let's see how we can prevent modifying data from descendant components. And for such cases, Vue provides us with another function called read-only that we're going to import in here from the Vue package. And now, to use this function, we basically have to wrap the data that we are providing within this function call, like so. And this way, we won't be able to modify this timeline items array from any descendant component, which is going to inject this data. And if we try to modify this data in the console, we're gonna get the following warnings. So Vue warns us upfront about that we're trying to modify some data in descendant component provided from some ancestor component. So this way, function read-only lets us add extra security layer and prevent data mutations inside descendant components that is injected in that component from some ancestor component. So let's discard these changes we have done to activity seconds to complete component. Go back to the app component, and in here we're going to make a couple more pieces of data read-only. We don't need to do this for the first 5 provide function calls, since all these calls provide access to functions. But what we will do instead is actually use function read-only for the last 3 calls, since all of these calls provide access to the actual data. And at the end of this lesson, let's just do one more run through our application and make sure that everything is functioning right. So we are not getting any kind of errors, which means our refactoring was successful.